Okay. I think, yeah, it looks like everything's going. This is a weird one for me today because didn't have time to do the tests on on the intro part
I blame
because
me.
no, actually it was because StreamYards kept on updating for me. Or Streamlabs kept on
Oh,
updating for me. So whenever it updates, sometimes it resets to the previous one. Um, but this time I'm like, oh, it worked. It's 62. Yes, we're at 62 episodes. It's crazy. But yes, happy to have you here. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right. I wish I could say I was happy to be here with a good script, but we're gonna have fun with this one anyway.
Yeah, we are. We're definitely gonna have fun with this one. I want to thank everyone who has been with us for the show for these 62 episodes, and hopefully for the next 62 up there. It's been fun. I am excited because we're getting warm weather in Canada again, and I'm looking forward to like heading outdoors more again, and burning off my winter weight from the
Yeah.
hibernation I've been having to do.
Yeah, we
So
could see ground here too. It's brown, but we can see ground.
yeah, I mean, I will say it was a relatively short winter so far. Knock on wood that it still stays relatively short and we don't get a huge impact. But yeah, I'm happy. I like clean outdoor weather so that I can go walking
Yeah.
and exploring and whatnot. So speaking of which, don't get much of that in this script as it's a contained thriller. So with that being
Yes.
said, let's get on the road with the intro. Welcome to Scripts on Saturdays, the only screenplay review show on the interwebs discussing scripts both professional and amateur, circulating around Hollywood, giving you, the TV and movie-going audience, a behind-the-scenes and inside track on what writers are pushing and what producers are buying. I am your host, the Script Doctor, and joining me this week is the wonderful Adega of Adega Outlaw. How is it going? First,
Well,
second screenplay of March. 1 week out from spring. How are you doing?
actually, I've been selling books, so in that regard, I'm doing good. And I'm excited, as always, to be here. This is a fun show, and I hope that you get many, many, many more scripts because this actually is. It's one of those ones I was mentioning it just before we started that a lot of programs and things that you watch are very repetitive, and this may have a similar formula for each week, but you get new stories every week, and I think whether they're great stories or not so great stories, there's a huge draw for me in that. It's very fascinating, and I enjoy being here and very honored to be here. Thank you.
I'm honored to have you, and yeah, that was the premise of this show. Is like the format of the show is relatively the same, but the content gets to be pretty different, and in some cases drastically so, from week to
Right.
week. Because again, like yeah, there's a lot of successful shows out there that do repeat a lot of the same things, and that works. That works for them. But I kind of wanted to do something that is more in line with the mentality of the creative art space, which is constantly find me something new or different, right? Which, you know,
Right.
yeah, there's some comfort and familiarity, but you also kind of want to have that surprise. And I think this show kind of fits into that mentality because excuse me, as I mentioned mentioned off air. Sorry for a little offsiding part. My girlfriend has
Baked
been
goods.
experimenting with cooking, and I am the taste tester, so I might be a little gassy upstairs today, and I excuse myself for that. Um, yeah, she does. Again, we eat dinner early in the day so that we have the whole night, like a longer overnight fast type of thing. So yes, every once in a while I might have to excuse myself as a little bit of gas from my throat escapes, which is better than the downstairs aspect for my
There you
girlfriend.
go.
But as
That's
I
just the
was
chainsaw next door.
exactly, but as I was saying, yeah, like one of the aspects of Hollywood is, and like traditional Hollywood is that you kind of want to be giving someone something new that has an air of familiarity, but is different enough to talk about because otherwise, if you're just dishing out art for the sake of putting it on display or to be disposable, it then becomes a decoration as opposed to something that stimulates the senses. And one of the things I hope to find with a show like this, and we found a few scripts that have already done this, which is they kind of require deeper thought because they're so intriguing from that first read, and there's more that you kind of want to dig into and explore and see where it can go. And that's the goal of a show like this is to show people that not only is that mentality still alive, but it's actually something that is constantly being circulated around Hollywood, and then it's up to the studios to have their executives take their heads out of their keisters and take a look at what's actually coming across their desks and doing what we're doing and considering them in the same way we're considering them, because you never know, you might have that one sleeper script that becomes a big hit and then allows you to blaze a trail in the industry for some more competitive storytelling.
That's part of what I was going to say too, is that, because we did that, you and I, If I Had Your Face, and lo and behold, they took that script and now it's going to actually be made into a show. So it's fun to see what happens if they fail or someone gets revisited and they show up.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
beauty in this. I really enjoy this.
Yes, and having you, who is an accomplished author, to give your insight is also helpful as well for all those listening out there. Even if it is the screenwriter who has Googled themselves and their script and has found our commentary on it, we're hoping that we can provide something useful for them as well. One of the things that I was always worried about, but not necessarily averse to, was just like trashing a bad script without anything like helpful or constructive as a result of it.
Right.
But thankfully, every co-host, yours included, all had really great takes and means to help lift up the spirits of the writer to get them, I guess, closer to the premise that they pitched, and the execution to follow through with that level than
Mhm.
just saying give up, which is not what we want to do here. We don't want people to
Right.
give up on writing. We want you to keep pushing forward, you know, because it's a hard thing and there's a lot of value to it. So
Yeah.
so, with that being said, let's get into tonight's script. Uh, this script actually finished 47th on the blacklist with 12 votes. It is called The Teller and is written by Ben Ripley. And the logline for The Teller is as follows: a timid, overlooked bank teller with an incredible sleight of hand dexterity teams up with a rogue FBI agent to rob her own bank. Adega, could you share with us the synopsis, please?
Violet, a downtrodden bank teller, is recruited by rogue FBI agent Jeff to rob her San Francisco branch. With Sheik, Almira, and Rough Tyler, they chase millions of hidden gold. Trust phrase, betrayal spiral, and freedom hangs in the thread. Or it's prison for all. But as the heist unfolds, who will outlast the chaos?
All right. So, what we have here is a classic type of heist story. Um,
Yeah,
def-
and it's one of those ones where you were talking about there's a certain amount of familiarity.
there's definitely a certain amount of familiarity. There's a little Ocean's 11 meets Usual Suspects, meets Vantage Point or Rashomon, depending on your own
Hmm.
proclivities. I would say, there's a narrative structure and gimmick here that definitely makes it intriguing. Um, so based like just on the log line and the synopsis alone, you're thinking, okay, this is probably going to be, a very intense kind of serious thing. But well, what were your real first impressions, Adega? Excuse me again,
Um,
of the script when you after reading this log line and jumping in?
well, when I first started getting into it, the character development I thought was there was more of a scene development than a character development, and I found myself not caring about any of the people right off the jump, and that tended to continue through. Uh, there was also the scene of San Francisco where this was set, and trust me, I'm glad I'm out of California, and you visited California more frequently than I have because it's been years since I moved out.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know the difference between a small town and a California town where people's attitudes towards one another are totally different. And I think that kind of set me off because sitting at the teller, you have rude people come in after rude people coming in after rude people coming in and seeing her boredom. And For someone like me, I think the approach to open it up may have been a little bit better if we delved into a little bit more of her personality and not how people were treating her, but more on her reaction to how people were treating her. It was so, what should I say, vacant of that at the beginning. So I think I found a little missing. There should have been more of her emotional status, and maybe I read it wrong. Maybe it was she was just complete melancholy, blank slate there. And that's the way it was supposed to be. But I found that difficult.
I think the writer Ben Ripley was trying to establish the kick the dog moment, which is the inverse of the save the cat, right? Your main character is
Right.
just everybody around them in the world is just kicking them while they're down, or that they're because they're down, just for the sake of like saying I want everyone reading the script or watching this movie to identify that our main character Violet is a doormat, and I'm going to drill that home as hard as possible. But they did so at the expense of us seeing a proper reaction to this behavior. Like, it's very much
Hmm.
kind of just she's towing the line. Like, whatever the opposite person is doing to her, she is just saying, yes, okay. And we don't get a sense of. We don't get a sense of that being driven by fear or driven by any other emotion. It's just there to be there. And I think because we usually with a timid person, they acquiesce to all these types of things, but they do so because they're timid. They don't want to offend. They have personal stakes, like this is the only job they could get. They don't want to lose the job, or maybe they've been bad at their job and they have two strikes against them, so they're just doing whatever they can to hold on for another paycheck. And then we find out the home life, and we're like, okay, the home life isn't much of a refuge either. So we really
Right.
understand the beating up part of it, but instead we actually get a setup where we don't understand her own personal stakes, but the writer is trying to give us this situation to empathize with her, because the very first scene we
It
get,
was.
yeah, the very
Yeah, I was just thinking of the way he describes about how she was dressed, about her
yeah, like
hair. You don't see her
dull.
shoes, but this is what you assume because this is the type of person. I get that he was trying, but in the effort, I found it being more like watching an automaton.
Yeah, like a drone.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think what ended up happening here is he deflated his own dramatic introduction, because in that first scene, Violet, our main character, who has terrible hair and a plain suit and no real spine to her, is being robbed, not necessarily at gunpoint, but just being
No,
robbed at the teller. And the woman who is robbing her is this really glammed up lady. She has a bag and she's telling her what to do exactly, and even knows certain information about the bank that excuse me, that you'd not expect a robber to know. And she's just going with it. And I think what also hurts this opening is the fact that we have editorializing by the writer that would normally be seen as prose within a novel, and it's information that, again, you read it and you're like, well, how are we able to convey to an audience seeing this visually this information? And in many cases it's not there. For instance, the whole, like, okay, you have a lot of an actor to do when the robber says, "Oh, do Control F P or whatever," and I'll print off a dummy receipt, so it makes it look like this all looks above
hmm,
board. Well, you have the commentary. Well, how does she know about this thing? Well, okay, so who are
right,
you going to have convey that question, right? And how are you going to do that visually? How are you going to do that through the actor who's be playing the Violet in this situation would have to get really inventive with the director to try and convey that sudden shock, right? And also play it not as a shock as well, because it's actually described in the script that she's not physically emoting any reaction to that because
right,
she's
right.
terrified. So you're giving us information that can't be filmed because you've already taken away the option for us to have that filmed by way of this other character. And so, yeah, it was really, I mean, because I thought premise wise, oh, this is really cool. Have a very convincing and fairly believable bank heist, one on one, where a person has said, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to fill up this bag with my bag with all the cash, not your bag, because, we know those will have the triggered blue ink and all that stuff. You're going to print out a receipt so it looks like it's a normal transaction, and you're not going to hit the silent alarm until I'm well out of this building, because if you do, I'm going to hear it because I know it sounds like a chirp. you know?
Right. Which a silent alarm with a chirp. It's not really a silent alarm, is it?
Right.
That bothered me. But
Bothered me
also
too.
another thing too was there was no threat.
Yeah.
There was a demand, but there was no threat. All she had to do was close her window.
Right.
You
The other
know,
part, too, I think this is also a little bit of a commentary with the more recent San Francisco laws, which is that if a person comes in and takes something, you're supposed to just let them take it, not defend your business, whether it's private or whether it's something huge
right.
like a bank. And I think there's a little bit of commentary on that, which I wish they kind of explored a little bit more.
Hmm.
And because it felt like a
Well,
good
see,
opportunity to comment on the bureaucracy of things.
they did a little bit, but I don't think it was enough to justify this situation.
Yeah.
Later on when they talked about, well, this is bank policy, this is state policy, if they take so much, you don't do anything, and the insurance will cover it. And the mentality was almost there. The explanation for the reason this to exist is almost there. But again, if like you were to see someone in a CVS or Walgreens or what have you, where they go in with a shopping bag and just start collecting things and walking out, they're grabbing them themselves. In a bank, the person coming in doesn't have that option. They have to rely upon the teller.
To
And the teller,
cooperate, yes. And in order
yeah,
to do
and
that, there
without,
needs to be a threat.
yes, exactly, exactly. That's where I was going. Yep.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't even have to be like an elaborate threat. It just needs to imply enough to get the teller and any reasonable person to think, you know what, I'm not going to risk it, and I'm going to abide by this person's demands.
Hmm.
So yeah, like that. It could have been anything. Like for instance, let's say, hypothetically speaking, the thief comes in. She talks to the security guard and says, "Hey, could you please hold my bag for a moment while I go do a transaction, real quick?" It's like, so he holds the bag. She takes out a little mini wallet. She goes up to the teller. She says, there's a bomb in that bag that the security
Yep.
guard is holding, and if you do not do what I say, I'm going to trigger that bomb, killing him and anyone within 20 feet radius of the bank." Now, she could be completely lying, but, a character of reasonable intelligence would say, I cannot risk that. So, yes, I'm going to do that. And then you have her walk out, and she grabs the bag from the security guard and says, thank you so much for holding it. Have a wonderful day, and leaves. And then, boom, there's your silent alarm trigger. There's the police come in. They find out what happened. And then you can have a comedic scene with the security guard going, oh my gosh, I nearly died.
Right, right.
But it's like, well, did you look inside the bag? Well, no, because I would be rude. It's like, so we have no idea if there's ever any actual threat or harm to the person. So she hoodwinked everybody. And then you're like, oh, okay, clever. That's a clever thief right there.
Hmm.
But instead, she just walks in, says, this is what you're gonna do, and then Violet just acquiesces. And it feels like it's 80% there. that was just my
Right,
take. It felt 80%
right,
there. But I
right.
will say the pacing for this script was actually quite solid because you kind of get to the next beats pretty quick.
Hmm.
We get into the introduction of Jeff, who is this FBI agent in his 50s, and he's coming in from D.C. to get information about the robbery. And he immediately starts mocking Violet's appearance. And this is where I was looking at it like, okay, is this trying to be one of those movies that has a serious premise but is throwing in a little bit of comedy for a levity purpose because there's supposed to be like some sort of underlying comedic aspect to it? Because I felt like the tone when he entered did shift to more, okay, now we're trying to elicit laughter out of the audience because we have this obnoxious male jerky
Yep.
character making fun of
With
not
bird
just even
crap on his
Violet
shoulder.
but everybody else. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah. No, that was the thing too. If for that first, I would say almost third, I was expecting to see a comedy angle come out of it, but
yeah.
it didn't.
No, I mean, yeah, especially when we get introduced to Violet's husband, Craig, who we don't see technically right away because the first instance of him, he's just snoring while she's in bed looking up. But when Violet mentions her husband, like she says that he's like an active theater director or something. And the guy's
Hmm.
like, as opposed to a deactive one, or like he's just making
Right.
fun of the what it is. But we also find out that Craig is definitely he's that type of obnoxious, self-centered type of guy where he wakes up in the middle of the night. He's like, I just realized a break in the story. She's like, oh, that's great. I'm getting my iPad. How about some tea? And he's implying that she should stop what she's doing and go make him something to drink so that he at 3 a.m. can be his artistic self. And then later on in the script, we also have like he calls her up and freaking out, saying, "Hey, you took my iPad," and she's like, "No, I don't. I didn't. I've everything's fine." She's like, "No, you took mine is the Pro and yours is the Air or whatever." And
Right.
he's like, oh, "Okay, well it's here." And he's like, "Okay, come drop it off to me." And she's like, "I'm at work," and he's freaking out. Never even thinking, okay, I'm going to come down there and get it. He's saying, okay, throw it into a cab and send it to me. It's like he's a very lazy, self-centered character. Um, and I was kind of curious about their. I wanted to see a little bit more of their relationship. Like, I I wanted to figure out how these two got together,
Yeah, because
or at
that
least
relationship doesn't make sense at all.
right. There's just something very very wrong with it, and and even with the twist at the end, it still didn't add up for me without
Hmm.
spoiling it.
Hmm.
So that was something that kind of raised a red flag. But he was definitely played. Craig is definitely played as a comedic character that you kind of want to see get his comeuppance,
Yeah.
and it just felt like we were missing a beat from that to basically understand this situation more and understand her motivation. But what we also have is this situation where Violet and her boss, who is the branch manager, are kind of at odds after this first robbery because, yeah, Violet did what Michelle wanted her to do, which is, let the criminal get the money and get out. We're insured. We don't want to risk any of the other clients' safety. And then Jeff is like saying, well, no, you should at least stopped her. You have a security guard. You should protect this stuff. And of course that type of aggression gets under Michelle's skin, and Violet doesn't want to be involved. And we have this kind of dynamic here where Jeff is kind of pissing off Michelle, and then we get to see Michelle's morning routine, where like she comes in early and she checks everything over, goes into every single nook and cranny to make sure everything is as it was, and then um, half hour later the staff shows up. They got 15 minutes, and then the doors open and the bank is operational, and then it's business as normal. Um,
Here's kind of a it's you're I know you're progressing into the story, but it's more of a psychological aspect, which I was thinking of. And Michelle started the character of Michelle started to point it out, but there was also the point when Jeff first came into the meeting, he says, "You're so lucky to live in San Francisco," and I don't know anybody that still says that. Um, to me, I got the impression that the author, and I nothing against you if you're listening to this, but it seems like the experience you've had comes from a certain mindset in a certain group where people of this type of working class, the clerical, that type, are someone to be looked down upon as they failed. And Michelle points that out where she has a picture of Christy Yamaguchi on there. She wanted to be an ice skater but didn't. And that kind of set into me that the whole mood is that to be in this situation is all of it's all wrong. And when Violet gets influenced later on, it's working in these type of fields, accountant or what have you,
mhm.
all of it's something to look down upon. And I couldn't shake that feeling. And Michelle seemed to epitomize that with that because once upon a time I played music very well. I was a well practiced saxophonist, and never in any of my dealings with music or my aspirations did I ever put up a poster of another artist, except for maybe Kenny G to use as a target practice because that guy is not talented at all. Um, yeah, he makes money at being an idiot, but other than that, I'm just thinking the whole mood of the setting. I think the author could do it to where there was a little bit more sympathy for these type of people that work in banking or in accounting or do the rat race, instead of looking at it as what was the phrase? I can't remember. An off, the awful of it. The fact that Michelle is a bank manager instead of skating, and the phrase was the awful of it. And I thought, is it? Some people enjoy that. I have a relative that really likes doing banking.
Hmm.
So it just, uh, there was an empathy there that was missing overall. Like I said, it wasn't so much of the story thing as beat per beat, but as a psychological aspect, a feel of it for people.
Well, it got to me like everyone that worked there had a bit of resentment because their dreams had collapsed, and this is
Yeah,
their second or third choice for just sustainability, if anything.
right. And
And
Joaquin didn't take a beat at all before he was like, I'm gone.
yeah, and I think that has to do with the fact that he's trying to establish again the kicking of the dog moment, the doormat stuff, which is these are the
Yeah.
people who work these jobs, at least in this particular branch, have had huge aspirations outside of their own skill set, failed, and instead of persevering further to try and get to those dreams, they gave up and ended up here.
Well,
And
assuming you're right that that's what he was trying to do,
well,
I think he came short.
I think that was what he was trying to do with the character of Jeff because of his whole apex predator and his whole you should defend your business type of thing.
Right.
And he's got a whole bunch of people who are like, no, we're just gonna do as we're told. And I think that's where you have that situation, right? Like people who forge their own path don't necessarily do what they're told because they're building their own path, and the people that do that they're told don't end up having an impact on anything as significant as someone who was to forge their own path. And I think that's what the writer was trying to establish here. And I think he wasn't able to quite nail it in the broader sense because
Hmm.
he was doing something particular with Violet so that there could be a bigger payoff for her character as opposed to that underlining theme of which is about essentially supposed to be like don't ever give up on what makes you happy. And I don't think he quite defined that well enough with what he's doing because he was leaning too much on like the apex predator thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where it muddied the water because we're now established a little bit of a pattern here with the story, which is that this Jeff FBI agent from DC is flown out to San Francisco to follow up with regards to a bank robberies to find the person who has robbed this bank so cleverly so that they can arrest them, charge them, and then uh, you know take down whatever that operation is. And what ends up happening after this first robbery is that Violet ends up going on like a 2 week leave, paid leave for trauma. But the thing that raises an eyebrow for Jeff is that she doesn't behave as though she'd been traumatized. She doesn't go to seek a counsel or anything. She doesn't know any groups. And her husband is the only man that she talks to, and he also does not care the fact that she was just at the wrong end of a robbery. So Jeff is really confused by this, and he finds this entire attitude that's occurring in San Francisco to be a joke. But again, the government has sent him out here, so he's going to do his due diligence, and he does, and he leaves. And then we get back into the routine of things where Violet is back to as if nothing has changed. The rest of the tellers, they were all too busy with their own work to even know that Violet was involved with being held up in the weeks previous. So they have there's no chip on their shoulder. There's nothing freaking them out. But then, as the new routine is as the old routine is starting to come into play again, a guy in a hoodie who looks a lot like a suspicious punk comes in, and he goes up to Violet's table, and then says, "Yeah, you're gonna give me all the money you can, or I'm gonna stab you." So here we have
Yeah.
the first threat, you know,
Yep. Yep.
and so that thing goes down the same way. Only this time, I think she presses the silent alarm first, but he still gets away, and no one is still of the wiser. And we go through this cycle again where Jeff comes back and he's like, "What the hell? This thing happened again? Like clearly someone has tipped off that you guys do not actually protect your business, so this bank is going to be robbed again." Like he's saying it's guaranteed to happen. There's no
Hmm.
two ifs, ands, or buts about it. It is going to happen. We get introduced to Julie Vandervaart, who is the bank executive as well. So, like, so she runs I guess a number of branches in this region, and she comes down, and Jeff starts making fun of her and her incompetence, and how saying like all this stuff is just really bad policy. You're going to be getting robbed all the time, and it's not going to be great. And before that, even part of that scene kind of finishes, we get it interrupted with, I guess, a present day moment where the bank is trashed. There's bullet holes everywhere, and they're interviewing Michelle, who's got like a bruised black eye, and two new FBI agents are interviewing, and they're saying, okay, tell us what happened with this robbery. And so now we have a point of view, Rashomon vantage point gimmick going on, where a witness, kind of like in Usual Suspects, is telling of the events that led up to this new robbery that is we're now just kind of thrust into in the aftermath of. What was your thoughts on that sudden narrative change in that second act?
That immediately I started to suspect certain characters were not who they were. To me it was an easy guess on that. For him to an FBI agent to react the way he did to the branch manager coming in, for and I think some of it too was just me aggravated at the protocol that they just would allow theft, even if it was just $1,000. I mean, it was distracting for me, but I did start to notice this is where the author started having problems structuring the story. It got really bad not too far from here, where it really needed to be redesigned. The errors started coming out, the spelling errors started to come out. This is where you could see that his focus was not as poignant as it should be.
Yeah.
And so the bank manager, the head honcho, was it Vanderbilt, whoever it was, had almost no impact whatsoever at this point. I think introducing a new character should have, and if it was going to be a character in the story, which eventually she, played more of a role, I think it should have been a little more tightened up than what it was. And Jeff became awfully suspicious. And if the way we know his character ended out, I think it should have been more subtle.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have been that. He seemed like he would be more of a rookie instead of a seasoned guy waiting for retirement. He should have had a tight arrogance instead of jovial disregard for protocol. It didn't make sense to me.
No, it really didn't. I think it should have been more of a green attitude, because, and the other part too, you're absolutely right. As soon as we get to this time jump into the present, and then we're going back again, he doesn't identify the time in the scene heading. He actually does it in the description afterwards, which is unnecessary so it's extra word count as well. And I picked up, like, within the first 10 pages, like, a couple of missing words or incorrect spelling or grammar. And then in the second act, a few other parts similar to that as well. But as soon as we get, the present time thing where the bank has been robbed for a third time, and it's actually far more violent than in the previous two encounters, we come back to that scene again where Jeff is now giving Michelle the third degree about how she doesn't know anything about her own staff or employees. And if she doesn't care about her staff or employees, clearly she's not going to care about this business. And clearly, this is going to be an easy mark for a lot of thieves. And the one thing that I thought was kind of clever, because it was better masked exposition than normally you would see in other variations of the script, which is that he asks Michelle, like, what is Violet's birthday? And she's like, well, I don't know. And she's like, April 13th. Where is she from? Where's her hometown? She's like, I don't know. It's Reno, Nevada. And you're like, oh, okay, so cool. So we have this little stuff. And then we go back to Violet's home, and she's up late at night, and she's, kind of contemplating these last two robberies. And she suddenly pulls out a deck of cards, and she manages to dish them out like an expert. And you kind of realize, oh, there we go. We're now piecing two things together. She was born and raised in Nevada. She's moved out to San Francisco. We get a subtle commentary about how quick she is at counting money for the clients that are making withdrawals. And now
Mhm.
here she is with a deck of cards, dishing them out like a pro. And then when her husband comes into the kitchen, within seconds, all those cards and those 5 sets that have been evenly distributed out are now off the table and hidden in her hand. And you realize, oh, she was probably a card
Very
shark.
talented. Yep.
And
Yep.
it was well put together. I'm like, this has got some skill here. Why is it kind of feeling like that level of detail and forethought is not in the rest of the first act and for majority of the second act? At least not as well organized as how that is laid out. Because I feel like all the pieces are there to the puzzle, but I think they're being mismatched deliberately to try and replicate that sleight of hand effect. But I think the method that he used has come at the expense of the narrative of that story.
Oh,
Be-
I completely agree. And especially with that, I do agree with you too. That scene where Jeff was grilling Michelle about his employees. Not only is that applicable to just about anybody that's had a job with a boss where the boss recognizes you, the teamwork works better when they know that. But also it points to Jeff having done unnecessary homework about Violet.
right.
And that leads into say, well, why is he paying attention to her? And then the cards. And I thought, yeah, that was well played. The author did a good job of that. But again, like you said, it wasn't consistent throughout.
It wasn't. I think one of the reasons why it kind of hurt is because multiple times we go back to the same scene, or at least the same period of day, and we get a new piece of information, but they happen so far apart that if you were to watch it, you might not have proper recall to the other information that you already seen, because
Hmm.
the way that it's structured to make you not pay attention to it while also giving you some information, which is a sleight of hand magic trick anyways. But for this type of story, it might end up causing a more confusing interpretation of it, as opposed to what it's designed to do, which is to make you watch the movie again afterwards so that you
Right.
can see all the puzzles in place, kind of like,
Right.
an instant replay aspect. And this is a
Right.
very
But
tricky
there
thing to
wasn't
do.
and there wasn't enough subtle hints that even if you did on replay to get anything new on it.
Yeah.
There were details that could have been there that weren't. And there were things that were just jumbled and mixed up, especially when we get to the actual robbery. A lot of errors were in that.
Yeah, I mean the first one. So yeah, let's jump into that, because that's actually like the crux of the actual script itself takes place during this robbery event.
Hmm.
So what we learn is that Jeff has actually been working with the first two robbers already, and they have targeted this particular bank because they believe that there is some undocumented gold being stored there somewhere in the vault. And their whole goal is to not only just rob the cash, but also steal that gold, split it, among their team, and live a life of luxury, because that's always the selfish goal.
Right.
Jeff has identified Violet as being a card shark when she was a teenager working for a casino in Nevada, and
Has
she's
a
worked
criminal record.
and has a
Yep.
criminal record. But she was underage, so she only went to like juvenile hall, and it's my understanding that she was actually paired up with, I think, her father, and her father went to jail as well. And because and this part here he screws up a little bit, because she says she was a very good card shark, but she'd always be paying out to this 38-year-old who for some reason never won a hand. And it's like, well, how do you pay out to a 38-year-old in a
Hmm.
blackjack without winning a hand? If anything, you should be saying who kept winning a hand, because she was the one counting the cards and dishing him out the best deal, so that she'd always bust or he'd always win. That would show how good she was. But I think he screwed up again. Either it was a grammar mistake, spell mistake, or just a missed detail. But he made it look a little bit more obvious to the fraud itself, so it's easier to catch, as opposed to the fact that a lot of casino owners and their investigators are actually quite sharp people and former card sharks themselves. That's how they're able to identify. They're paid a lot of money to identify staff or customers that are gaming the system. so that they can be booted out, or if they end up committing an excessive amount of fraud, charges laid, and then go to jail. So
Right.
this part of her backstory gets a little implodes a little bit because I think the writer kind of rushed through it, or at least he didn't rush through it. I think he thought it out really well, but typing it out, I think his excitement kind of got him through that section too quickly to the point where he didn't go back to double check or make sure that the
Right.
logic was there.
And this could also be a really good spot if he does do a rewrite, if you pay attention, let's decide to rewrite it and do it again, where her current husband somehow tied into that Nevada thing. And that's how she
Hmm.
got tied in because of the criminal aspect of it, being a minor, and somehow found a dependency upon this person, and that's why they stayed together. There could be a story there that would add flavor and depth to it that we don't have.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, or there could have been again another thing maybe that parallels what Jeff's motivations were with regards to Craig and what is going on here. But essentially, Jeff says, well, he's trying to call out Violet, saying, "You're a card shark. You've got some of the best sleight of hand and dexterity skills he's ever seen. If I didn't know any better, I would swear that you were here to rob this bank, but you've been here too long and never made a move to the point where I don't know why you're not, living your true self, being your apex predator." And Violet is trying to say, like, I served my time, I learned my lesson, I just want to be left alone. And he's not buying it, so he ends up blackmailing her to cooperate with their bank heist. And he's going to cut her in for a quarter of the proceeds. And she doesn't really resist anything because we're missing a set of stakes, which is the fact that he doesn't really threaten her with an arrest, and the only consequence she might have is that she'll lose her job. But we also don't get much in the ways of, well, could she find another job anywhere else, or what have you. There is a section where he claims that Violet got a fake social security number, but I think that was glossed over too much for it to really have any depth, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Um, because I would think, okay, well, if she's got a fake number, why don't you just go the whole nine and do a completely fake identity? What's her real name? You know, like really amp up the stakes is the fact that she's done a great deal of work to hide who she really is, and she's trying to play this role. And this guy's like, well, not only do I get to, it's not just like you'll get fired. It's the fact that because you've got a fake identity, you've got a fake social security card, that's a whole set of lists of frauds that could throw you in jail for 20 to 40 years or what have you, right? So where's that
Right.
stake being led up here?
Right. And I think, and that was a disappointment too. It's the biggest stake that he held against her. The biggest threat was, well, who are they going to believe, you or me?
Yeah.
And I'm a guy, and um, that didn't hold for me. So, but it was just, it could have been done better. It could have done better.
Yeah, there's the seed of the idea was there, but yeah, it just didn't germinate enough. And I think that came at the expense of Ben Ripley is trying to get this as fast paced as possible
Hmm.
to get you into the juicy bits that he's got set as the set pieces, but I think it's like more bone than meat, so to speak, for not allegory. You got a nice rack of ribs,
Right.
but there's far more bone than there is the meat on the ribs.
Right. And even rushing things, the or meat a set of bone, the stakes would be higher if the concern for the characters was greater, and
Yeah.
building the stakes for the characters, why the characters are the way they were, what happened in for her past with Vegas, her relationships, all of that. It just maybe 3 pages more of character development could have really paid off.
Yeah, like maybe if they had something more personal where, let's say, her husband Craig, he's putting on an original show himself. There's some significant buzz to it, but it's financially dependent on Violet's paycheck because
Right,
it's completely self-financed. And maybe she even believes in the story too, so she cares. And
right,
so from her point of view, it's like I have to keep this job because my husband needs the next 3 paychecks I have to put on his show, which I saw, and I think it's brilliant, and everybody is incredibly supportive for it. But we're financing it because we want total ownership of it. We don't want to share that stuff because we've been exploited so many times before, where he has made shows that other producers have essentially stolen away from him, and they've made a fortune on, and so that's why they're stuck in this rut. Like, there's your empathy, right? Like, they've been taking advantage of con men, and they don't want to be doing that again. And then here we go. We
Right.
have an FBI agent who's going rogue as a con man, now trying to control Violet so that he can get $20 million and whoever knows how many bars of gold are hidden in this bank.
And there's also the old cliche story, and it would work in this case, even though it's been done a lot, where the sympathy built on her is her escape. It doesn't her escape from him or escape from her job or
Mm-hmm.
the just the financial aspect of their existence wasn't stressed high enough. And if there was more of a stake in that, where, walk away from a guy who's doing theater and not doing very well. She got away from trouble once before, she can get away from trouble again. The stakes, I think, is the biggest mistake. There was the stakes like we talked about at the beginning. There was no threat.
Mm-hmm.
There's no threat to her well-being later on. Why rob a bank? All of that. The definition of her need was never really pinned.
No, that's the other part too. Like, I up until the very last act, I could not infer what her goal was,
Hmm.
and they do kind of set up with one thing, like she's got this very expensive red pen,
Hmm.
and Jeff takes it from her and says, "You're if you want this back, you got to become your apex self again, and you got to take it back from me." And that, I mean, it felt kind of like a poor attempt at symbolism. uh,
Right, right.
and
Plus, and this goes along with that too. I sorry, I didn't mean to
go,
interrupt,
please
but
go ahead.
without spoiling the end, the that threat, somebody took something from me, somebody did this, does not equal the amount of change that we see at the end with the personality traits to
Right.
be able to do some of the things that were done. It doesn't add up.
Yeah, and it doesn't work out in the same way that you'd see a character change, as I mentioned before, like Usual Suspects, because again, we have that situation where a character is being investigated and they're retelling the story for us. And the twist of The Usual Suspects is that you see at the end how clever verbal Kent is by fabricating a story using all of these clues that are on the crime wall behind the investigator, and how it plays out, and he recounts it to the point where, oh, he has been playing this role and he's been playing this investigator the entire time, and he did so with nothing to go on aside from a couple of names and some situations that were posted on the wall behind him that were in this office before anyone got here. So he basically made all that stuff up on the fly as a distraction to get him out, and then you kind of understand, like, this guy's a very calculated, witty, and he's got great guile to work on his feet as at the same time. And you're like, okay, I believe it, right? But in this case here, we don't have a character change with Violet that feels like either she's really is still that card shark that she's always been and she's playing a long game, or that she is using the events in her surroundings to calculate a way to victory or anything of that nature. It just does not
Hmm.
line up with as much due diligence as Usual Suspects, or like, say, even in Ocean's 11, where, in the George Clooney movie, they recreate the vault inside and they do, a little videotape swap to fool, the casino owner. And the only thing they didn't account for is that he put in new tiles with his logo in it, in a place where no one, unless the person who works there, would ever see or care about that logo, right? So, like, that was the one thing they didn't account for. So, yeah,
It made me think of and I had the the name of the movie in my head, but I forgot it. It was a comedy with Steve Martin and two others where they were basically I don't it's not Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, maybe it is, but they were con men
Hmm.
or against each other. Their same mark was this lady,
Yeah, yeah, that's him and
and
Michael Caine, right?
it could be, yeah.
Yeah, that's Dirty
And
Rotten Scoundrels.
when the change at the end came, where she was actually playing both of them, it was so believable because everything was set up, and yet it was still a surprise.
Hmm.
And for the author of this, maybe go back and look at the beats, the hints, and the different things in there, to where you can rewrite this and add that into this in some form of similarity of development of the story, because it could, I think, benefit you a lot, even if just for an exercise.
I would agree with that too. The other part too, I also try and find a stronger voice for the characters themselves,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
one of the things, and this is something that has been kind of true for a lot of the scripts that we've reviewed so far, is that there weren't many situations where there was a line in the script that you could be like, oh, I can see people quoting that because
Right,
that's such a good line. And this is the type
right.
of script that you think would have at least a handful of them, just on the premise alone. Like, as it's a heist script and it's contained thriller and there's a lot of energy going around, you're expecting that energy to also come through the characters themselves. Because I will say, like, Jeff has a very distinct voice from Michelle and Violet, but the distinction isn't enough. You have to give them something that stands out and is also kind of pairs well with the movie. Like, you kind of want to have that moment, like in Superman, where Superman catches Lois for the first time and he's like, "Evening, miss, I got you," and she goes, "You've got me. Who's got you?" Like, that's a very quotable of the situation, of that character line that stands out, and you completely understand how logical that works, but also how fantastical it is representing that scene in that moment.
Right.
A
And
crime
that,
thriller
that
like
would
this needs
make it
that.
real. Yeah. And I would think instead of talking about apex predator, Jeff talking to Violet so much, I would think more of how are you, why are you playing with the cards you were dealt?
Yeah.
Relate to things that are relatable to her. Apex predator isn't it. She was a dealer. She was sleight of hand. And those type of phrases I think would add a lot too.
Oh yeah. Like,
And
there's
you can
definitely.
get to the quotable statements. Yeah.
Oh no, there's lots of room to play with card analogies. Like, okay, you were dealt a pair against someone who's got a full house. Well, how do you, as a card shark, turn that pair into a royal flush? Because that's the hand you need.
Yep.
Like, you got to play around with the terminology. It doesn't matter that Jeff's an FBI agent. If he's doing his research on Violet and he's trying to convince her to join him, he's going to have to talk her language.
Right. One
And
day you want to beat the house.
yeah, one day you want to beat the house, and when you were the house, you were stealing from the. You're the only one that
Yeah.
ever beat the house who worked for the house. That type of stuff.
Yep. Yep.
And here you are in another house that is way more better insured and far more legit, or at least so they claim, than any casino. And instead of beating the house, you're beating the clients.
Mhm.
And
And that would also add a lot of depth too, where you say deal with the cards that you were dealt with, and then you could do some sort of inner monologue or scene where she analyzes what she was dealt with, where she's at. You can see her thinking in the process. These are the cards that she was dealt, and this is how she's going to maneuver through it.
yeah, because then now we're getting into better connections with the characters and their strategy.
Hmm.
We're now engaging with
Hmm.
the audience who's like, okay, if she is laying out her hand, and this is and she's got, say, one of each suit, and there are no consecutive numbers, and it's all kind of like a mess. It's like you can't do anything with that. But then all of a sudden she says something, and then we see a representative of that hand. One card slips out, and all of a sudden now she's got a pair.
Hmm.
Or she's got something closer to, like, oh, she's got now two of the same suit, and then she gets a third, and now it's a third of the same, three of the same suit. Like, oh, she's going for a straight or a flush, you know?
And it makes the tie between a teller and a dealer that much tighter.
Yeah. I think that could be something to explore because that also stands out a little bit more. And the
Hmm.
other part too is, again, with any type of heist story, there's always that gamble. The gamble is, like,
Yep.
they are going to be caught. There's a ticking clock involved. There's all these elements of story crafting they can definitely utilize. And the ticking clock part does kind of work. He does use a little bit of it. Like, we have this one scene where there is a certain employee who guards the vault, so to speak. And she goes on a
Hmm.
break from 10 to 10:30. So you have a 30-minute window. I'm like, okay, great. We have a ticking clock situation. That's awesome. And we do get this nice little narrative of Violet managing to, palm a key that gives access to a door that allows them to get another access towards the vault. And we see how she does it and goes through, and it's very Ocean's 11 like. And I was like, okay, we got some potential here. This is fine. Doesn't feel that thrilling, but we're playing out the beats. And then the crew comes in. They drill through the vault, and instead of cracking it directly, they actually hack in, I guess, to the timer. And they're trying to speed up the timer so that it automatically releases, so they don't actually have to figure out the combination. And we're missing something from that. And I think what we're missing from it is, well, tell us why they have to alter the timer so it unlocks as opposed to just cracking it traditionally. Because if it's
Right.
cracked traditionally and they say, oh, well, if it's opened during this window, not by a key, but by, say, a safe cracker, it's going to trigger an alarm. Like, just tell us that it's going to trigger an alarm if it's opened
Right.
within this window without the proper access of the key or the proper access of the code or whatever it is. Give us something so that we understand why they're going about it this way, because then we get this other red herring, which is, oh, the clock that they're racking up is not racking up fast enough, so they need another 10 minutes. So what does Jeff do? Well, he contacts Violet, and he says, you have to stall what's her name for 10 minutes because that's what we need in order to get in and get out. And she's
Right.
like, well, I don't know how to do that. And he's like, well, you got to think on your feet. And what she ends up doing is she manages to cut across the bank, leaving her post without even telling anybody, hides in an area that's between, I guess, the teller section and the vault, and she just starts crying, playing on to this woman's sympathy to, like, ask what's wrong. And eventually they just kind of get a group together to go have a sit down somewhere else so that she can basically dish out her feelings about being in a loveless marriage and all this other stuff that is all designed just to occupy another 10 minutes. And it felt just kind of forgettable and kind of not very clever. and
I
and
would
be,
have believed it a little bit more if what had led up to it was a little bit better. This is one of the things where I said the heist was pretty bad.
yeah.
Itself was the description of how the team got in, the carts went in, the bags got in, was a mess.
Hmm.
That needed to be cleaned up quite a bit.
I
The
didn't quite get the
part
spatial
where,
geography of how this was working out. Yeah.
yeah, the building is amorphous. You go down this hall. Wait, this is an older hall. Oh, wait, this has never been used. There's this door and this door and this door.
Yeah.
It doesn't add up. There's no geological cohesion to it. There is, and then there's little errors like the clock gets shot. In one scene, the clock's shattered on the floor. Another scene, it's still on the wall after it was already supposed to be there.
Hmm.
So it's things like that where, her going in, and I could see this working, where someone would be in a hallway, bawling their head off, and it would make a good distraction. But the whole scene around it, as well as what you were saying, wasn't tight enough to make it a strong enough scene to be believable.
And on top of that, we already had established that no one really gives Violet the time of day. No one really knows who she is. So for Michelle and even the other lady that they introduce as like the vault supervisor, what have you, for them to actually care and then worry about her felt disingenuous because there'd been never any inclination that they were beyond just co-workers that were working like, arm's length apart. Like there's
Right.
nothing interpersonal.
It was just actually the opposite, where Michelle didn't know Violet's birth date, where she came from, any of that.
Yeah, she knew nothing of her other than she was a good employee.
Hmm.
And then the other one was like, well, the only reason Violet ever interacts with the other one is to sign out cash when her cash drawers are empty. And there's nothing really more. There's no real small talk there at all, other than that lady noticing that the pen that she's using to sign out the cash is not her favorite red pen,
Right.
and basically saying the same thing that Jeff said was like, you're don't ever lend that out, you'll never get it back. And Violet saying, I think I can. And then that's all we get of their interaction. So for us, we would need something a little bit more in depth. Like, give us a coffee thing where Violet is pouring this lady a cup of coffee and they have like a 5 minute chat. And like they know, like she knows her friends, her coworkers' daughters' names and that they're
Hmm.
going to school or something, so that we can believe if she were to break down somewhere in the middle of the bank, that person would definitely want to tend to her and care and listen to what she has to say, as opposed to this coming out of the blue and all of a sudden we have these two characters demonstrating a level of empathy we have never seen before.
Right, and that would only take a quarter of a page where you're catching the end of a conversation.
Yes.
You can jump in the end of it and you can see the emotion, you can see the conclusion. You don't need to know the details other than that they had an emotional moment about somebody's past or something that was going on during the day. It
And
wouldn't
it
take very much at all.
and it just needs to feel like it's routine. Like she's pouring the cup of coffee.
Hmm.
Hey, how did your kid do on that spelling bee? Oh, she came in second place. But you know what got her? The word organization. She spelt it with an S. I don't know what
Right.
happened there. We practiced it. She's like, oh, yeah, I've been there too. Boom. That's all you need. You already established through a couple of exchanges of lines that these two actually have a routine and talk and share with each other, because you have the opening question being a follow-up to an event that happened in the past, and that says, okay, there's history between these two. That's it.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
we and I think that would have made that moment stronger, because on its face, beat wise, it would work, but you have to have that setup there. You have to let us completely believe for their introduction that these two are more than just coworkers, that there's a little bit of a friendly camaraderie here, and that there's a little bit of sharing of private information that may or may not be appropriate at work, but relatively harmless.
Right. Right.
Because when she's going in and she's venting about her home life and her husband and all that stuff, it's TMI for the situation that has already been established, which is that she doesn't ever talk about herself at work and
Hmm.
she never inquires about anyone else at work. So this becomes something very much of a red flag on the verisimilitude side of things. Because if this was like, say, her first couple weeks there, I could understand that. But it's not. They've established that she's been here for a while. And
Right.
and so it just stretches credulity. Um, but anyways, it ends up working. They get into the bank there. They get all the cash in their duffel bags. And of course, Jeff is looking
Can
for
I hit
something else.
Can I hit something just before that?
Sure. Yeah.
It goes along with we had done the Penestrator before, where it would do the author a world of good to actually study things a little bit more because they used a phone recording to get the what was it?
Oh,
She
the
needed the
passcode. Yeah.
passcode, right? And we had talked about this with the other one. Passcodes, even if you use like something like PayPal, are going to be randomized every time you use it. So having the phone there recording that is in real life useless, and everyone knows it.
Yeah, pretty much.
So,
I mean, yeah, you're looking at, say, like a two-factor authentication type of thing for a code of this
right,
minimum, because
right,
it's a bank.
right, right.
And so
And
the code that you do like 45 minutes ago is not going to be the same code later. You're going to have some sort of key that you have to, like, whether it's a
right,
digital key with a randomizer on it that's in sync with the randomizer of of the keypad, or whatever. There's something else there.
yep. And like again, back to the beginning, the silent alarm that wasn't silent, and just and a security guard who doesn't pay attention except to his phone. Just too many little details that say, you know what, the scene isn't as believable as it could be.
Yeah, it's a little too convenient
Hmm.
for the thieves.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, because I would have liked, it would have been great if we had a moment where the security guard doesn't know that Violet is being robbed at her counter, and he walks up just to say hi, or maybe like the thief drops something. He walks up, and he's like, "Oh, you dropped this your bank card or your wallet or something as you're approaching this. Here you go, miss." And then you have that tension where, oh, is he going to
That would.
pick up that
Yep.
she's being robbed? And then you have that battle of wits moment with the thief, where she's like, "Oh, thank you so much. I was just asking this nice teller here, Violet, to empty my account here because I think the service was actually bad, but maybe you're changing my mind." And then she's kind of distracts the security
Hmm.
guard, while Violet continues to empty out the register to her. And then he's just like, well, I think you should stay. This is a good bank. It's protected by me. Your money is safe. And she's like, you know what? Maybe you're right. Well, thank you so much. And then he walks away and she turns around and she says kind of out loud, okay, you can put the money back into my account. And then she kind of gives her a thing like, just print out a receipt that I deposit this and I'm only going to be taking this. Like, she says what she has to do to get out of the job, but you find out like, yeah, this is the guy's not incompetent. He's fairly decent at his job, but the criminal is slightly more wittier than he is. So now we realize it's not just an easy mark. It's like there's a little bit of guile. There's a little bit of intelligence from the villains of this story. And it's not just the convenience of making everybody else incompetent so that the villains can get away with the crime.
Right.
That would be a nice little gimmick to use. Now, up until this point in the script where they've robbed the vault and they're about to get out, Jeff gets upset because he's looking for the gold, and we don't know it's gold yet, but we're going to find out. But he's looking for the gold. It's not there. And so instead of leaving, he basically has his team kind of enter the bank, make an announcement, shoot it up, but he's already outside wearing sunglasses, eating a pretzel as the police are on their way. But so I'm getting ahead of myself because as soon as they get in there, as soon as the criminals kind of reveal themselves that they're robbing the bank, Michelle is trying to contact the police, and Violet is stopping her, and then she's on the phone with the security company saying, "Yeah, we're having a party, and there's people that are drunk and they're saying stuff." Meanwhile, this is all happening at around 10:45 in the morning, right? So why is the security guy on the phone, of the security company saying, "Well, what do you mean you're having a party? It's 10:45 a.m." Like, why are there people drunk at 10:45 a.m. at a bank that's supposed to be during having normal operating hours? Like, all of these questions that should be asked by a character in that position are not being asked. And I used to work with these guys because when I was at a part-time job with Blockbuster, we had a third-party security consultants that would do monitoring our alarms and everything, and they would call in with requesting passcodes and anything was weird or normal. And if all of a sudden, for instance, you deactivated the alarm at say 12 noon instead of at the normal 9 o'clock in the morning time, they not only would call that store multiple times, they'd also send down 2 units to figure out what's going on. Yep. Why is there no one attending the store? So that seems par for the course. But for here, it's like, okay, a silent alarm is triggered. It's in the morning. They call to verify, hey, is this a real thing, or should we deactivate it, or should we send the police? And Violet manages to get a hold of the phone, and she's giving all these excuses, and at no point is the guy on the other side doing his due diligence, saying like, why are you claiming that there's a party and people drunk before 11 a.m. in the morning on, I think it's like a midweekday, so not a weekend or anything like that. Always raise red flags. And he's not pushing it. All he's saying is like, just give me the password and I will turn off the alarm and I will not send the police on your way. And she's trying to figure out what it could possibly be. And then she says, oh, the password is Yamaguchi. And the guy says, okay, that's it. But that's also another wrong part, because the company manager of any security detail doesn't really get to pick the password. The password is usually picked, especially of a corporation, by the agency that is doing security. They tell you what the password is. And they do that through like either a signed correspondence letter. So like they have to get a signature first, and then that signature has to match on the actual delivery of the password itself. So they get the first package, they sign for it, that goes back. They say that's the signature, they verify it. They send the same person to identify the same person again, say this is the password for your code. And then they have all these other stipulations they have to call in and do to get all that done, sorted, so that you know what the password is supposed to be. And we used, at Blockbuster Video, we had to do this every month because the password was never the same. Right. At all. And it was also frustrating because you're like, okay, I got to remember this. Don't write it down, because if you write it down, someone might find it and use it. It's like, oh, great. So we got to really remember it. And it was always a pain in the butt. But that's usually what the case is. But in this part here, again, it's too easy.
Right.
And I think it would have been more
if that was
interesting.
corrected
Yeah.
Exactly. If that was correct, did you know, say the security company had a camera in there and they had to fool the camera where the guy that Michelle called, Michelle called, so that should have ticked him off too. One, the caller says one thing, the person who grabbed the phone says something else. Immediate response. But,
Hmm.
there could have been cameras they needed to avoid, all kinds of different things. That they had one camera in the vault, and that's all they talked about, where banks are loaded with them. So
Yeah.
just little things, yeah, that it could have added a ton of tension if they were addressed.
Yeah, and if you wanted to say, oh, well, why didn't the security system or the security firm monitoring the bank call as soon as they broke into the vault? You could say the bank is a little cheap. They have a CCTV system that's completely isolated. The only thing they have is their silent alarm stuff that keeps costs low, and that's why they don't have the live monitoring, because it's too expensive. So you can go always work under the precedent of a cheap bank that's trying to
Right.
keep their costs low, which is why they don't have a full staff all the time. There's only 4 tellers working and the bank manager, so you understand that part. And then the other part too, which ends up being a twist, is that they're also illegally holding gold bars on behalf of a client and not reporting it because they want to keep that account. So you already have these sets of breaking the rules, as it were, or tightening of the belt, or showing the frugalness of this company to basically not excuse but justify why certain other amenities are not available at this time that would definitely prevent a robbery of this type. But it also goes into factor, oh, this is also what makes it an easy target. They don't have
Hmm.
live third-party security monitoring of this. They only have one security guard for this large bank, which is very old and very important to this company, but they don't have a full staff. They don't have full security. They cut corners, and they care so little about their staff that they don't even know their coworkers' birthdays. Like, you have a lot of tools in place to really make this kind of work, but you're not playing with them as effectively as you could, for the drama of the situation. And when you make certain aspects too easy, like for instance the password part, you should have actually made her fail at that, because then you don't have to come up with another excuse to get the police there. You save yourself a story
Right.
beat. Because the
Yep.
whole goal that the writer wanted is he wants the police to surround the bank. He wants the FBI there. Well, that's your part right there. Have your character fail, because then
Yep.
that comes into the stakes, which is like, well, if she fails, then now she's at more risk to getting caught cooperating with this team that we know she's already agreed to do so for weaker stakes, right? So get us into that nitty gritty right there. Save us the 3 pages and just say, okay, I'm sorry, that's not the right password. We are sending a patrol car over to assess the situation, and then when that patrol car comes up, that's when you can have one of the criminals shoot at the cop car, and then that escalates it to the next level, and now the FBI are involved, and there's news coverage, and there's helicopters, and all that stuff, and then you have Jeff, who's already outside of the bank at this point, basically come up,
Strolled up with this pretzel.
rolled over with his pretzel, identifies himself as FBI to the other 2 FBI agents and to the authorities, and they're asking, oh, why are you here? He's like, well, I was here in town anyways, and I saw this happening. I figured I might as well lend a hand. And if you don't want it, that's fine. I'll go back to what I'm doing. But again, they say, well, okay, well, lend a hand. And he has extra added effort too, which is he could say, listen, I investigated this bank twice because there's 2 robberies. I warned them that there'd be a third. They didn't want to take any of my suggestions for security under advisement. I was in town on this other piece of business, this other crime I'm following up on, and lo and behold, here I am with my foresight being paid off. And then we also have fun with dramatic irony, which is that he's the guy that's orchestrated this very robbery.
Yep.
That little tail part, the dramatic irony, I thought was fine, but the setup to get there, I think it was a little bit too quick. Wasn't as elaborate as what I just said, actually. I wish they kind of went a little bit closer to that. But I mean, I do appreciate that story beat as a gimmick, right? It's like, okay, the FBI guy is going to get out. He's going to leave his 2 cohorts behind to sort of secure the bank, or at least put that hostage situation on the table. And then he is going to now, from the outside, use his FBI status to manipulate the authorities so that he and the team can get away with the loot. But he's only out there not just to get away with the loot, but he's also out there because he knows that Julie Vandervaart, the corporate bank
Right.
executive, is going to be summoned down to address the situation, and he's going to interrogate her on the gold that is supposedly hidden in the bank, and she's of course going to deny it. And this is kind of like where I want to cut off with the spoilers, because we get into the final third of the script, and it's a lot of repeating of other story beats from different angles with newer information from each character, to the point where lots of different characters are playing each other. Um,
Right.
all for the
And
very thing of that gold at the end.
right, right. And some of the character development to that point does not make it at all helpful or believable for some of the people's actions.
No, it doesn't. In fact, because it gets a little bit too muddy
Hmm.
in the juggling around of all these characters and their different dynamic, we kind of
No pun intended.
yeah, no pun intended. We kind of lose the thread a little bit, because there are some points where Jeff is so dominant in a portion of the script that he kind of takes on the role of the main character, and we get Violet pushed aside. And while I do think that is deliberate, I don't think that is the best choice here, because I think it would be best for this type of script is if the audience can still maintain their empathy for Violet at this point.
Hmm.
Granted, better stakes are set up for her to have, so that we can follow her. And the other part too is like, Michelle as a character kind of flip flops a little bit in this story, and I
A
think she
little
needs to have
bit.
more like because she's the branch manager, she's directly the boss of Violet, and I think she needs a little bit more consistency, because she kind of felt
Yeah.
consistent all the way up until Jeff's second visit, and then in that during the robbery and everything else, she is very different.
Yep.
Um, and I felt like, did the writer accidentally like switch her character name with another character, and that's where it's getting all muddy, or is this like, what is going on here? And then when you get towards the end and there's no payoff to it, so it's not like a payoff and then after the fact we get the setup to justify what we just saw. It just felt disorganized
Hmm.
in that regard for me.
Hmm. No, I agree 100%.
Yeah, but the thing is, I mean, I like the concept. I like the idea of a former card shark with great dexterity stealing from her own bank,
Hmm.
uh, and working with a rogue FBI agent. Like, there's a dynamic there. The premise is actually kind of solid, but
Yeah, considering what we know about our FBI now, it's really solid.
yeah. Oh yes, yeah, it hits closer to home than expected.
Yep.
But this goes back to like a lesson that John Truby, who's a brilliant writer, and has a couple of books that are great, where he talks about like holding your honor, holding up your premise, and executing and maintaining your premise through the entirety of the script. And while the premise, I would say, with these two working together to rob their bank is there, I would say the execution level of that premise doesn't meet the creative level of the premise itself. Like, the execution is kind of like boilerplate here and there, and it is pulling from other techniques of other stories that do it well. And
Hmm.
I would say it's not done on a level of an amateur. I definitely see a level of professionalism to it, but I think it's a little bit more too rushed to hit those different twists and turns and beats, as opposed to making it more like a clear path, uh, not predictable in that sense, but inevitable. If you understand what I'm getting at here, where
Yeah, I'm also wondering too. No, go ahead, finish your thought. I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. It's basically like not a linear path from point A to point B, but I want to have that zigzag. But when I get to the end of the zigzag, I want to be able to look back and see the linear path.
Right,
Right.
right.
So, and now, as you were saying, sir.
Oh, it was just an overall thing. It wasn't necessarily specifics about this script. I felt because you could see where there were things that looked like they were reaching to the right point, but with the spelling errors, the repeated words, various different aspects, it almost seemed like he was trying to write two ideas at once. And I'm not saying in the single script. Maybe, and you would know this because you've done scripts, maybe he's working on two or three projects at the same time, and this one just seemed to have the fine details neglected. Maybe it's one of three, and
Hmm.
it was his least favorite. I don't know. It just, I had the sense that this person could have not or could have done better. It wasn't that they can't do better, but they could have.
It's entirely possible. I've been in situations where I've been writing multiple scripts at the same time, and sometimes I would get to a slog where I'm like, okay, I just have to finish these next 10 pages, and then I move on to the other part. And then, even though in the back of my mind it's like, yeah, I'm going to go back to these 10 pages and make sure they're the best they are later, but right now the priority is on this other story. And if I forget that priority and I end up sending off that script with those bad 10 pages, it's not until it's too late where I realize, oh, I solely screwed up. I shouldn't have sent that draft out. This script might be similar in that situation. I'm not 100% sure because, I mean, I see talent from this Ben Ripley guy. And I don't think he was punching up above his weight class. I think there's a little bit more of a rush going on with this draft compared to what he might have been able to do if he had a wider deadline. Because I mean, let me see. I need to double check if there's a date on this script of when he. Okay, so yeah, he submitted this in September of 2023. So this has been actually around for a year. So yeah, interesting, because this is on the 2024 blacklist. So yeah, this had been out for a year. At least this version of the draft that is available had been out for a year beforehand. So maybe he just kind of got it out there and moved it along and started working on the next one, and didn't really take another gander at it beforehand.
I for people that write, and you're obviously very good at this. It would seem to me that when you see this many errors, because you know my circumstance, I am writing in a rush. Everything I'm doing is in an absolute rush for reasons. But when you're in a rush, that's when errors set in. And with you, I have the thought that if he was able to take a week or two to go back and reestablish his ideas and rewrite and look at it, because spelling errors are things that are indicative of a rush, or indicative of being drunk at the time, and it's something that I see what could have been.
Oh, yeah. Like, I mean, one of the things I notice is that there's actually a period in the script, I think in the second act, where there's at least 10 or 15 pages where I didn't notice any grammar or spelling errors. And then towards the end, they started popping up. One that actually really stood out was this line that says, I knew there's be a private jet. Like, it's pirate speak. But I think it's to be, I knew there should have been, or I knew there would be a private jet, something a little bit more, grammatically correct. Even though people don't always speak grammatically correct, you kind of put that in the line anyways, just because at least that gives a context for the actor to kind of take it their own. Like if it's written grammatically correct, but maybe they'll throw an accent on it, or they'll maybe abbreviate it in some way so that it fits with whatever character they've added to the character for that performance. And we've never had any other lines that had this type of pirate speak previous for this character. So when you get that one out there, you're like, okay, so the writer, he was typing so fast, he put an S instead of a D and didn't go back to correct it. And then on top of that, a spell check's not even going to catch that, or a grammar check in Final Draft isn't going to catch that. So even when you're rereading it again, you're only doing like a half attentive job on it, which is always why I never get myself to reread a script within 2 weeks after I finish reading it. I usually have to wait a month or so, because then I have a more of a cleansed palate to check it out. And usually in that interim, I've already sent it off to a couple of friends I trust to be like, just tear the crap out of this script. Find every single problem, nonsensical thing, spelling mistake ever, and go for it. Because like if I get notes from a colleague and the notes is like 10 pages long or more, I know that I screwed up, and I know that this person's helping me. And if that same colleague sends me a set of notes that are only 1 or 2 pages, I know that they tried really hard to make it longer and they couldn't. And then I feel comfortable knowing, okay, I didn't screw up. And if that's consistent across my friends and colleagues, then I know I'm in the right boat. And
Right.
and if and that's kind of what you're looking for, especially with criticism on your own works, is like send it out to a bunch of people that you trust. Hopefully they have similar attention to detail as you can get, and then see how much they respond back to the script. Like if you have a couple of paragraphs across the board, you're probably in good standing, and if those paragraphs cover the same issues, then it's like easy fix. But if you get like something that's, one person says, no, it's good, it's fine, and then another person gives you like 10 pages of notes, and another person gives you like 1 page of notes, and another person just gives you a thumbs up, it's not going to be as helpful. But you kind of have to push and prod and be like, I need more than just a thumbs up, buddy. Like this is something
Right.
I'm trying to, make a living off of. And it needs to be scrutinized. And even with the colleagues, whenever I do stuff, if I am giving you notes and it's under 10 pages, that's a really good sign that your script is actually probably in a solid position. And the stuff that I'm talking about are like, they might not be easy fixes, but they're important fixes that if you get done, my next set of notes to you, if you come back, will probably be two or 3 pages. But or maybe you want to do like a conversation like how you and I are having, where like, okay, let's just talk it over and see what other areas are rooms for improvement that can be done. And that's kind of what you want, like especially with my colleagues. Like I absolutely hate it if I work really hard on a script and I send it to a colleague I trust and they can't come back to me with anything, because it's like there's no way I've written a perfect script, because that doesn't happen. it just doesn't happen. So you got to push and prod with your colleagues, and that's why I like doing the consults, and that's why I recommend other people to other writers for consults, because you need to have those types of eyes on your work that sometimes your colleagues or your friends might be apprehensive to point out, but when you are able to identify them yourselves and you're able to bring them up, you're essentially giving them permission to like talk about it, and then that's when you can start getting the more of the useful feedback out of that. And I think with this Ben Ripley guy, I think he might have needed a couple of those people in his corner.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Because there's definitely got potential here, but I think this version, I would, charitably speaking, I think it's 50% there.
I agree. I think we're at the point, and I don't mean to rush you, but it seems like, I am gonna have to do a pass on it.
Yeah,
Uh,
I was about to prep you. Like, is this a green light or a pass?
right. Yeah, no, it's a pass. But I think it is something that he could work with, absolutely work with. There are bank robbery stories, um, and it's something that's been going on since the old films that didn't have any sound to them, uh,
Yeah,
where there was bank robberies, and where each set of circumstances and new situations, where instead of robbing a train, you're now robbing a bank. Instead of having to crack a safe, you have to do digital. It can add new things to the story, but like you said, 50% there. The 50% that is missing is 25% character development and 25% situational correctness or awareness of what a bank is nowadays and how they work, how they operate.
yeah. I don't think it would require a lot of extensive legwork there. I think most of it has been done. I think it's delving just a little bit deeper in those two areas.
Hmm.
And you can kind of get away with not having to do much on Violet's side of things, as long as you build up, say, Michelle and the other character who she talks with, that
Hmm.
they end up having that confab later. I think if you can kind of nail that, that will do what the writer wants in hiding certain aspects of Violet that can then be paid off later. So I'm with
Right.
you. I'm giving it a pass. It's a reluctant pass, because I do actually think that there's some potential there, but I think this is like the draft too early for that.
Right. Right. No, exactly.
Yeah,
And this author, I can see the capability there. I mean, this is only 108 pages. He has room to expand and clean.
he does, but he also has like the scenes were very quick to read. Like that's what I noticed with this one. It was not a
Hmm.
slog, so there's talent there. So I want to point out
Hmm.
that Ben Ripley has some talent. I just think there's a little bit more work to be done to really highlight that level of talent for him. And I think, I mean, I would love to read a second draft of this. Once if he's fixed some of the mistakes that we point out, or if he point out or if he found something that we have missed that he was able to address, that kind of ties up the things that we found issue with. It's also one of the few scripts that, even though I would pass on it, I would still recommend people giving it a read, because there are some aspects of the setup, like I mentioned with how Jeff points out some of Violet's backstory from where she's from, but not what she did, and then having that puzzle piece completed when she's at home dishing out the cards like a massive expert. Because if you know anything about the state of Nevada and gambling, and then you see, oh, kid from Nevada who lives in San Francisco and is really great with handling cards, you can rightfully infer that she grew up around card sharks or people that gambled and knew how to become a good card player or card shuffler. Right. It makes logical sense, and it's done so without it being too on the nose. So yeah, I wanna give props for that. I'd like to see more of that type of level of detail and creativity, which I think is there, just to expand it a bit more in the other characters, and with some of the plotting, maybe reduce a couple of times when you go back, and maybe include flashback as a parenthesis for when you do retell certain sections. Because again, I'm not the biggest fan of flashbacks, but I will give one positive nod to this writer, is that he did the one thing you're supposed to do with a flashback, which is convey new information to keep the pace of the story going. I just think that some of that information started to muddy up the existing information, and it needs to be kind of clarified a little bit more.
I've heard you mention that a few times on other shows this past month. It's really hitting you.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, with that being said, Adego, I want to thank you for being here. Are there any additional final thoughts you want to get off your chest before we call it a night?
Nah, this was always fun. And again, I always appreciate you having me here. And thank you, Darren, for posting those things. And Miss Martin gave you a flower.
Yes, I was just about to go over there. So I want to say thank you very much to Ms. Martin Muses, or Teresa Martin, for the super sticker of a flower. We're also going to check in to our patrons, because they got a chance to vote if they would greenlight or pass this. And of the patrons that voted, it is 100% that they would greenlight it. So they enjoyed reading this script, which is great for them. So they see something, or they didn't have as much issue with it as we did, but that's quite all right. Yeah. That's why we do that. And yeah. So I think that's great. So we have that little change there. So for those that have read the script, or if you want to read the script, please reach out to me via the Twitter X's, or you can subscribe to my Patreon and reach me out that way. Find out what scripts we'll be reading for the Saturday shows. And of course, please check out Adega's channel. The links are in the chat. There's also going to be links in the description. And with that being said, have a wonderful weekend, everyone. And never forget, when it comes to great story, it all starts with the script.